You just ate some sugar.
I'm sure that's what it is. All right. So I went and started it. So, Revelation. Quick review. I like to do quick reviews as we start up. I actually put some slides on it this time because I realized I hadn't been doing that. So we started off, of course, in this book with John is on an island and he gets a message to 7 churches. We know that he is in exile, having to do with his faith of something, and he gets Jesus coming and telling him messages to these churches, and we find out that these churches are responding in different ways to the pressures of living in the Roman Empire. Some are resisting and undergoing persecution. We know at least one person has died in one church. Some have false teachers among them that are advocating compromise. Some of them are compromising, and we said that there's a couple of them. It's hard to even tell if they're even a church anymore. They've compromised so far. And Jesus is revealing himself to them via this revelation. John was caught up into the throne room. Basically, chapters 4 through 11, we had this scene of Jesus being pictured as a slaughtered lamb, and God's will for all things represented as a scroll. And Jesus starts opening the scroll, and hell breaks loose on earth, as it were. The scroll is, at one point, the scroll is brought down out of heaven. John is told to eat it, to make that message his own. And the church is symbolized as 2 witnesses that are to be proclaiming God's word, witnessing to the world. And through it all, we have seen that there's a way of the world and a way of the Lamb. To have victory, the Christians need to follow the way of the Lamb and not the way of the world. And after the end of the 7th trumpet, we saw the end of all things, and God is now described as he who is and who was, because he has come. There's no more is to come on that description. And then we had a pause button kind of hit at the end of that whole cataclysmic story to ask, we're asking the question, why are things the way they are? If God's really on the throne, why do Christians suffer? What's going on with that? And so we had this, we had last week, 2 weeks ago, we had a set of this last set of visions in the book. We saw last time that Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, Satan was defeated and cast out of heaven, and he is furious, and he wants to take us down with him if he can. There's nothing more he can do to beat God, but he will wage war on us. We saw that he was trying to make war against the woman that we saw in the vision, but she was protected, and so how will he make war on her children, which is us? And that is to make us unfaithful. How get us to be unfaithful to God. And so, but how is he going to do that? Like, what strategies will the dragon employ? And that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to see that today pretty well. The strategies that the dragon employs to attack the church. And honestly, by the end of today, by the end of this section, we're going to get more or less the state that we saw at the beginning of the book, where God's people are confused, they're being compromised in some ways, and this is kind of giving us that backstory. And we're getting to see what's going on because we're looking behind the curtain, as it were. So, a little bit of background information that we need to talk about, as usual, with almost every one of these lessons. We have a little bit of background. We need to talk about this thing called Nero Redivivus, or Nero Return. Now, I'm sure you've heard of Nero. What do you know about Nero? What comes to mind when you think of Nero?
Just heard the name.
Heard the name? I hope at least Roman Caesar, right?
Burning Rome.
Right. Something about filling while Rome burns, right? It's attributed to him. You know something more, Quinn?
Considered a little
crazy?
loco.
Yeah. Quinn, you got something to tell us about Nero?
Yes, a little bit. He was a cruel ruler. However, he did create the one good thing that he did during his reign that the Romans appreciated was creating the baths.
I see. Well,
What'd you say?
Yes, he was pretty much hated all around except for when he invented those baths.
So yeah, he was a violent person. Historians think he was probably insane in some sense. He had some mental disease, honestly. He liked to persecute Rome. He liked to persecute Christians. They were an easy target. This is this new little religion that had started up. So any kind of problems he might have, he could blame on this group of people. And like this legend about fiddling while Rome burned. Rome did catch fire while he was Caesar. A large part of the city did burn, and there was some speculation historically that maybe he started it for whatever his purposes were, and of course his political opponents within the Roman government let that story ride. Because they were trying to take him down as because they were his political opponents. They wanted power instead. So to counter that, Nero blamed the Christians for the fire, and this allowed him to start some more heightened persecution of Christians. According to Christian tradition, he is the Caesar that executed both Paul and Peter. And so for the first couple of centuries of Christian history here, he is basically the Christian boogeyman. Like, this is the bad guy. He would take Christians, I think we talked about this in like the first or second session, where he would take Christians and put them in arenas. He's the one who fed them to lions. He would soak them in tar and put them on a pole and light them on fire, and they would burn to death as lights for his garden parties, which again sounds very weird. I don't know how his guests would have felt about that. It's a strange thing, but that was what he thought would show his power and authority. That I'm Nero and I can do what I want. So the Romans were pretty leery of him. He was deposed in 68 and committed suicide. Shortly after, however, a legend arose that he was going to come back. And the legend, depending on who you talk to and how the legend was portrayed, either he didn't really commit suicide, he only faked it, and he's coming back, and he's going to come back and rule again, or he's literally going to rise from the dead and come back and rule Rome again, right? So this is kind of this thing. It's called this legend or whatever. This story was called the Nero Redivivus, that Nero will return. And so, like, in over the next 20 years after Nero's death, no less than 3 different would-be conquerors came in and tried to attack Rome, claiming to be Nero reborn, ready to come in again. And one of them actually brought the Parthians along with him. If you remember the Parthian warriors we talked about with the seals, and tried to take over Rome, claiming to be Nero, come back again. So we have this legend that Nero's coming back, right? Nero is going to come back and somehow defeat death. Is kind of in the background of what we're going to talk about today. So this whole thing with Nero dying would have been about 20 to 30 years before Revelation was written. But that's a near enough history, and it's kind of a scary concept that maybe he's going to come back. And so this he as a figure really is a scary, like I said, kind of the Christian boogeyman kind of thing going on in the early church. So I wanted to bring that up because it's going to play into something John does here in this section. So, all right, shall we look at Revelation? Who's got 13, 1 to 10? Well, actually, if you got 13, 1 to 10, step back one verse to 12, 17, and then read 13, 1 to 10.
All right. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman, went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commands and hold fast their testimony about Jesus. The dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw the beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads with 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. People worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshipped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it?" The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise its authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Whoever has ears, let them hear. If anyone is going into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people.
All right, so we get the first of two beasts here in this chapter, the sea beast. So I got yourself there a picture. I've got a couple other pictures of the sea beast just because there's lots of pictures on the internet of the sea beast. So if you're interested in that, you can definitely find them.
There was even one of a Lego version.
Yeah, we found a Lego version that Quinn was excited about. That I wanted to show. I thought it was fun. So let's talk about what's happening here in the plot, in the story. All right, the dragon stands and he summons this beast, and the description of the beast is a lot like the dragon: 7 heads, 10 horns, the crowns. He looks like the dragon, and so the imagery there is very much about this beast. Whatever he's going to do is either a soldier or a pawn or something that's being used by the dragon for his purposes. And of course, the text kind of gives us that idea too. When the dragon gives the beast its power and authority, and to help the dragon with his mission. And so we get the idea that the dragon is summoning help, right? The dragon is summoning a warrior or a thing he can use to work for him. And what is this is all going to be in support of the dragon's mission. And what is the dragon's mission at this point in the story? What do we know the dragon wants to do? Remember? In the very last chapter, he's mad and
he's essentially persecuting the church to get people to turn away from God.
Right.
To prevent people from turning to God in the first place.
So he wants to attack the church, right? And we know from everything we've been seeing in Revelation that we know that from everything we've seen in Revelation that a strategy of killing Christians does not work well, right? We know that when Christians die, they're handed the white robes, right? And the martyrs under the altar and all that kind of stuff. So from the perspective of Revelation, killing the Christians does not win the war, which does not gain the dragon much. It just causes us to win, if you will. So it's not about killing them. It's going to be about tricking them into being faithless to God, right? So whatever the beast is going to do, it's going to be in support of that goal to help the dragon deceive God's people and get them to compromise, right? So God's people have the promise of a resurrection. So like I say, death is not going to be a good weapon for the dragon to use. Now, a first century reader who read his Bible and such would have a few, and also just the way this is presented, would have a few clues about who this beast might be. So let's see if we can figure that out using those kind of clues. So he comes from the sea. He rises up from the sea. So here is a map not a great map, a map of the area and the 7 churches, and the sea is on the western side, right? So what is to the west of these cities, geographically speaking? Like, well, if you know your geography, as we go west, what do we find? Where would this beast be coming from?
Well, they're in Greece.
They're in Asia Minor.
They're in Asia Minor, so Greece.
So Greece, and then even further would be Rome, right? So in this world where they're part of Roman Empire, when Rome would send its envoys, when Rome would send military whatever, when they were in there to check on things or whatever they want to do, they always came from the sea, right? So this idea that the beast is coming from the sea really hints that this is representative of the Roman government in some way. Also, Daniel had a vision of 4 beasts in the Old Testament. And John is drawing from those 4 beasts. The 4 beasts that Daniel saw were a lion, a bear, a leopard, and a 10-horned just kind of monster with iron jaws kind of thing in Daniel. And from early on, both early Jewish commentators and scholars, as well as early Christian scholars, had pretty much identified what those beasts represented, and they represented empires that were attacked, that were against God's people throughout history, starting with the Babylonians. The Babylonians came and destroyed the temple and took God's people away into exile, followed by the Medes, who conquered the Babylonians, followed by the Persians, who conquered the Medes. And the Persians were actually the ones who let the Israelites go back into the land and build their temple up again and stuff like that, but they still were very much in control and authority over them. And then followed by the last big beast that chewed up everything, being Alexander the Great, who just conquered the world. So most scholars at this time particularly would have known what those 4 beasts represented. So John smashes all of those beasts together into this beast, which I'll give you another view.
Hey, that's a dinosaur.
With a lot of horns, right? With other heads. And by the way, I pulled this up on my screen, and Cameron was looking over my shoulder, and he goes, "He's got a lion's mouth." I'm like, "That's exactly right. That's exactly what the text said." So that was interesting. But anyway, so John smashes all these beasts together into one big beast. And what do you think he's saying symbolically by that?
It's going to be worse than ever before.
Yep. I think he's saying this thing is worse than all of those empires, right? And we've already kind of identified this is probably Rome, and I'm going to stick with that. So yeah, this Roman Empire, right? That is causing problems for God's people is worse than all the empires that have been combined in the past. So he gives us this really cool symbol. I mean, he could have just written us a letter that, by the way, guys, Rome's really bad. You know, Rome's the worst it's ever been. You're gonna have to watch out. But instead, he gives us this really cool image and smashes together all these beasts from Daniel and draws on that to help us see that. Quentin, you've been asking one last time.
Well, I wanted to say this. Alexander the Great actually conquered much of his northern territory, just chasing down one army.
Yeah, is that right?
So what you got is Greece, and then he kind of made his way east into India, Indian areas, and then kind of traveled north to create a hump. All that kind of broke up one.
Well, for our purposes, Alexander the Great is kind of old history, and but the picture of that terrible empire that came and conquered everything is woven into this thing, right? Mm-hmm. Is woven into this picture of Rome. So by using the symbolism, we see that what's going on here is somehow uses man's desire to create empire, to do empire building as part of his plans to deceive the church. And that's kind of going to be the central theme, I think, of what we're talking about some today. So there's something about man's desire to conquer and build empires that is useful to the dragon to deceive the church and to get us to compromise Christ.
Where are you seeing that?
So the idea being that these beasts are all drawn from the beasts of Daniel. Each of those beasts in Daniel would have been clearly identified as another empire that is against God's people. Okay, so here in Revelation, what does the dragon call up? He calls up a super beast, a super empire, if you will. And I'm kind of positing the idea that there's something about empire and man's desire to conquer, man's desire to set up a society of with maybe even ideas of life and goodness that are against God's idea, the whole eschatology things we were talking about. Something about that is helpful to the dragon, because in this story, that's what he chooses to call up.
Just trying to throw this out there, do you think that there's something to a leopard, a lion, and a bear as all being like apex predators in their environment? I mean, a leopard would, don't think, what could output, in terms of a leopard in the desert?
Right.
Or a bear in the woods, or a lion in the jungle. Nothing could really.
Yeah, I think that those ideas would have been present in Daniel's version, right? Because Daniel's choosing those animals, and then John is just reusing those and pulling them in. But so yeah, I do think that's the idea. They're meant to be scary, powerful, creatures. And yeah, choosing as you're saying, like the apex predator in each of these environments is probably intentional. Sure, that makes sense to me. But I would also want to be clear that I think it's clear that John is drawing on Daniel's work there, right? And so he's trying to take what Daniel said about these empires and smash them together to this one. So basically the idea is that throughout history, God's people have been there, and there's always been some kind of empire or something that is against them. And one of the first things one of the first major things God does in Scripture is rescue His people from an empire. Right, He pulls them out of Egypt through the Exodus. And so there's a real sense in which this beast is Rome to these people, because that's what they would identify with as the empire that's crushing them at the moment. But there's also this sense that there's always going to be a bigger, badder empire, right? Alexander the Great's empire by this time was gone. The Medes are gone. The Persians are gone. Their big empires are gone. And even today, we would look back, and Rome is not a big empire anymore. It's gone. It's been replaced.
It's actually, in fact, there's nothing left of the Roman Empire. Italy technically was never, the current state of Italy was never technically a part of the Roman Empire. So no piece of the Roman Empire has survived.
All right. So again, I think what we want to get from this is the thing that I've been kind of presenting all along, is that Revelation is less about something that's going to happen in the future, but more about what always seems to keep happening with God's people. Right. Now, other things that kind of play into this for the Rome situation on this image right here. So Rome's Caesars took lots of blasphemous titles. That was just what they did. They called themselves the sons of God. So like when a Caesar would die, the next Caesar that came along would declare him a god, and he would then become deified. And so when Julius Caesar died and his nephew Augustus and declared him a god, then Augustus became a son of God because he was related to the Caesar that passed on, who was now a god. And so when Christians would talk about the son of God, you could see Romans would be like, oh, you talking about Julius Caesar? No, we're talking about Jesus, and that might be a problem. Yeah, be an issue for them, getting them into trouble. Domitian, who is the emperor at the time we think that Revelation was written, actually took it one step further and just demanded that people call him Lord and God during his lifetime. You don't have to wait till I'm dead. Just call me. You go ahead and call me that now. So this is what the Caesars did. So it completely makes sense in our passage here that this beast has blasphemous names and is saying blasphemous things. Because from a Christian perspective, from a godly perspective, that's what these Roman Caesars did. So we see in the text that everyone is terrified of this beast. They actually says, who could make war against it? And the idea is that's a rhetorical question. No one can. This beast is so mighty and terrifying and awful that what we should do is we should ally ourselves with this beast, right? We should do whatever he wants. It's kind of the implied message by how fearsome the beast is. But John points out that they're not really worshiping the beast as they're worshiping the dragon that's empowered the beast. He actually points that out in the text there. So one more thing to kind of pull into this thing.
Do you think just contextually here, you bring up the fear, and then on verse 5 it talks about the power was given to him. Do you think the fear of people only increases his perceived power, which kind of feeds into it?
Certainly. So, and I think that is certainly the case with what we see about Rome, right? Rome ruled by fear. You did the wrong thing, you got hung up on a cross. Seriously, military, might by the sword kind of ruling. That's what Rome had going on, certainly. I do want to call everybody's attention to verse 3 that talks about a head that is killed and revived. And the Greek that's actually underlying those words there is literally that it says that the head was slaughtered to death, which is the exact same words that we heard about the lamb back in chapter 5. Behold, a lamb slaughtered as if it were slaughtered to death, right, is what we saw when the lamb came. So the beast is mimicking the lamb in this idea of the thing that the head that has died comes back to life, and people are interested in worshiping. Everybody's amazed by this head that is dead and comes back to life. Has more over marvels and follows.
Are you saying that's what inspires the fear? In addition to,
I don't know if there's a lot of fear along with that, as long as it's right to follow him. Like Jesus, the Lamb was said, "You are right to have the power because you conquered death." So here's a thing that looks like he's conquering death, right? So he's mimicking the lamb. And of course, we also have this nice legend about Nero in the background, that Nero might come back. And so we have this kind of behind the scenes as well. And really, again, identifying strongly with Rome and a Roman Caesar. So what we get from this beast here, I think, is that John is casting the Roman Empire as this demonic beast that is empowered by Satan to attack the people of God. And again, we want to be sure that we're also seeing the idea of this always happens kind of thing. So there's a sense in which empire, I think, is naturally hostile to God's ways. And it's something that the ideas of empire are particularly useful to the dragon. I think that's what we're seeing in this section, where when the dragon wants to call up some servant to help him do his work, he calls up empire, right? And of course, in this case, it's Rome, because that's what they're saying. So we have this real sense of sides are starting to appear. The dragon is starting to recruit help for his mission. And we've got kind of a thing that has similarities and is trying to mimic the lamb that's been pictured in Christ in the story. I have a quote on your paper there that I probably could have put on the slide, but it's on the handout. The beast is a symbol of the perpetual deification of secular authority. Even more, he represents the powers of evil which lie behind the kingdoms of this world, and which encourage in society, at any moment in history, compromise with the truth and opposition to the justice and mercy of God. That's a quote from Book of Revelation, John by Stephen Smalley. So that's this idea that this beast is kind of representing all of the things that reflect the empowering of evil behind empire to persecute God's people.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay.
But,
verse 6.
Yeah.
And he opened his mouth to blaspheme against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, and then that dwell in heaven. His tabernacle, I feel very confident in this, is his church or his body of believers.
Okay. Yeah.
Because contextually, if you go to 7 and 8, it's still talking about the saints.
Yep.
And then it goes into those who aren't saints. So do you agree with that? This tabernacle as being the actual body that are still here or the body that is here on earth? Because it says his name, but it says his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven, going further into the saints. And then he starts talking about what's going to happen to those who aren't his tabernacle, to those who aren't in heaven in verse 8 and verse 9. Or, verse 8 and verse 10.
Yeah, we've certainly seen the image of the tabernacle representing God's people before, right? Back in, I think it was chapter 11, where John's measuring out the temple. And we had said that that represented God's people not being destroyed, right? That there was going to be a permanence.
I think I'm saying this in the interest of rapture. This clearly indicates people are going to be on earth.
Oh, I see what you mean. Well, I think what it's saying is, there might be differences in translation here, but it says he's uttering blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, who dwell in heaven. And also, it's allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And I think that point is where it's clear that the saints are on earth. This isn't a war that's happening in heaven. He's on the sea. He's down on earth, right? That's where that's happening. But yeah, I think your point is valid there.
Okay.
And you mentioned he has war on the saints and to conquer them. Authority is given to it, to all who dwell on earth and worship it. And this sounds like Rome, right? This sounds like Rome was conquering the known world, and everyone was going to be part of Rome. And when Rome came, we talk about when Rome comes to your door, they say, look, you can have this peace treaty, you better just take it, or we're just going to, and you kind of have this idea that, particularly from the perspective of these Christians who live in Asia Minor, this is what it looks like Rome is doing. Rome, the whole world is following after Rome, and you just better get on board. And this awful, nasty thing, right? So, all right. Any other ideas and questions about the sea beast? Or should we go on the land beast?
No, however, I am making a poster.
Okay. All right. why don't we move on then? Let's see what happens next in the story with another beast showing up. Who's got 11 to 18? Did Vivian have that?
She might already.
All right, okay.
She's currently taking care of Cameron.
Yeah, Cameron's not feeling well. That's right.
And I beheld another beast, or what'd you say, 11 to what?
11 to 18.
Okay. And I beheld
Finish chapter.
another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and he deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by a sword and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, and the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save that he had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast. For it is the number of a man, and his number is 666.
All right. And of course, in American society, have some dramatic music or something after that, right? when anytime 666 comes up, there's a big deal here. So, okay. So there's a few things to go over in this section, and we'll just kind of hit real quickly, and then we can talk about them. There's a land beast that shows up. There's an image of the beast that the land beast helps establish. And then there's the mark of the beast. All right, so let's take these in order here. So who is the land beast? It's fun when you go looking for images of the land beast. You get usually a lot of the stuff is like this, where you can see the sea beast and the land beast is kind of just over on the side, kind of sometimes in the background or something. Like here's another one. He's just kind of over there behind the hills or something like that. I don't know why people, when they draw this, they draw the land beast. Kind of almost not in the action or something. I don't know why that is.
So T is very much a part of the action.
Well, wouldn't that be even a much more dangerous beast? Is one that's subtle in disguise, you know?
Oh yeah. So you're getting right ahead of me here in terms of what we're going to talk about, certainly. But though I got to tell you, well, I'll put the picture up in a second. So we know that the sea beast, which we're saying represents Rome or Empire, looks like the dragon. And came from the sea. And now the land beast kind of rises up from the land. It's almost like he's greeting the sea beast, right? The dragon calls up the sea beast, and then immediately the land beast arises, and it's almost like they're ready to work together. You know, they've been waiting for this meeting or something. So the beast looks like the lamb, but sounds like the dragon. Okay, he looks like the lamb, but has words of the dragon. So this was the one I thought was the most the most disturbing image that I found. So the land beast looks okay. Hold on. So let's try to figure out who this is, right? So the land beast looks like the lamb, but sounds like the dragon. So who in our story, and it's not necessarily a specific person, but who in our story have we seen that appears like a lamb, but is actually speaking the words of the dragon? Have we seen anything like that before? So let's step back. What would it mean to look like the lamb? Like what kinds of characters look like the lamb?
Well, I was going to say Judas, but the only reason I say it is because he resembled Christ in bodily image, but he clearly did not behave like him in betrayal or evil works.
Sure. I don't know that there's a lot to recommend Judas as kind of a larger than life figure that would kind of play into this.
Yeah.
So what would it mean to look like the lamb, do you think?
It's almost like a false teacher in the church or something.
Yeah, there you go. I think that's exactly what it is. I think these are false teachers. In the letters to the churches, there were several churches that he was calling them out for putting up a false teaching, right? And he talked about the Nicolaitans, right? And some teacher named Nicholas that had come in, and there was There was a Jezebel character in one of the churches, and so we know that there are these false teachers within the church. So yeah, that's the thing. This beast comes from the land. It's from among them. It's from where they are, right? And it looks like the lamb, but it's speaking the words of the dragon. And yeah, and it's almost like, wow, like John is really casting these people. It's not like he's saying, it's a shame that those people have some wrong ideas and you ought to work with them. He's not saying that at all. He's saying they have the low words of the dragon in their mouth, right? This is a real damning kind of thing that John is saying. So these people advocating compromise with Rome, the false teaching that's been in the churches. And interestingly enough, as we're in 1 John in our church sermon series right now, we just talked about antichrists not just a couple of weeks back. And again, John wrote that, right? So he has this, he really views false teachers amidst God's people as bad, really bad news, right? So I think he is describing them as this beast. And so yeah, those people in your congregation that are advocating compromise with Rome, you shouldn't listen to them. They're speaking words of the dragon. That's what he's saying. So we have this sense that, again, battle lines are being drawn, right? The dragon is going to wage war on the lamb, and we get an idea of his battle strategy now. He is he has this conquering empire to put force and put pressure on God's people, and then inside the church, he brings up these false teachers that are advocating compromise with the empire. You notice a lot of things that the land beast is doing is in support of the empire, right? He's always, in support of the sea beast. He's putting up an image of the beast. He's telling people to worship the other beast and all that kind of stuff. And that very much sounds like a false prophet from within advocating compromise. Well, we should just do what Rome wants,
I think of the gigantic preface to what you just said here. It says, if any man have an ear, let him hear. Because clearly, having false, he just got done talking about the saints. And he says, and all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life. Or, he's talking about this. And he says, if any man have an ear to let him hear, and then you start talking about false prophets. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. So here I'm looking at it as the true word of God is the only way to defend what this guy is teaching. And you would have to have ears that God has given you to hear to discern the difference.
Right. All right, so let's look at what the land beast does. He gets the people and participates in creating an image of the beast. And in this case, the beast is the land beast. The sea beast. Or the land beast is creating an image of the sea beast. Breathes life into the image so that those who don't worship it are killed. Right? So if you're not worshiping part of the empire, then you'll be killed. So what's going on with this image, the image of the beast, right? So the word that's used there for image is the word that we would get icon from, which is the same thing that they would have called the images on their coins, right? They would call that an icon. They'd call that an image of Caesar, right? So when you say to an ancient person like that there's an image of something else, the image I'm most commonly familiar with is this kind of image, the image of the Caesars that they see all the time, right? So I think we have to consider that. So this, I guess what I'm trying to say is this image would have jumped to mind, is the idea. So, so as we're trying to parse this out, what's going on with this image and what's John trying to tell us here? Do you remember when the Pharisees tried to trick Jesus about paying taxes, and they held up a denarius and they said, whose image is on there? And he said, Caesar. And he said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but give to God what is God's. And just kind of like you can play with that a little bit with this, give to Caesar the thing that has Caesar's image on it, right? But what has God's image on it, given what we know about Christian theology or whatever? Who are the bearers of God's image, right?
Right.
We are, right?
Right.
So the idea is that there's this image is a false image of what it means to be human. We are the bearers of the image of God. There's a sense in which the image idea here has to do with humanity, right? And so I think the idea that's going on here, maybe we should step back to tie to humanity a little bit better. Who's got Genesis 1 and 2? Did we have that one?
I'll read it.
Oh. I was going to say I can grab it quickly too. Here, I'll grab it here. Genesis 1, 26 and 27. So God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, and male and female, he created them. And then if you jump down to verse 7 of chapter 2, where it gives us a little more detail, the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living creature. So the imagery that's going on here in Revelation is very much paralleling what's happening in Genesis, where God breathes life into the image of himself that is man. And in here, the land beast breathes life into the image of the sea beast, causing it to become alive and speak and do things like that. So I think John is clearly drawing a parallel between the creation account and how man is created and what's going on here.
You don't think he is breathing life into this image of a false Christ? Because it says, because I wouldn't worship you, you wouldn't worship me, but we would worship an icon. And this icon being, and we're talking about false prophets, creating a Christ where you say, this is the Messiah you guys need to worship.
So I think the idea is that I'm trying to tie this back to the eschatology idea, right? So that Rome has a vision of what it means to be fully human and to be fully satisfied and to have a fulfilled life. Do it Rome's way, right? And that's against God's way. And the idea is that what commentators something I draw is they're trying to get us to the point of seeing that this image of the beast it's almost like Rome and this whole thing is creating a new image of what humanity ought to be and breathing life into it, right? And it is again against what God would have us be. And this idea about the eschatology we've talked about it many sessions. And honestly, an empire. So at its core, all of us have an eschatology. Everyone in the world would be a lot happier if you just did things my way, quite frankly, because I'm right, obviously, right? That's what we all are. And an empire is just that at a bigger scale. It's when a country decided, the whole world would be better.
So you're saying he's breathing life in contrast to God breathing life into dirt to make him like him. This thing is breathing life into self.
This image.
Essentially to worship self. It's kind of like taking yourself to be your own.
Well, I think it's the image is an image of the empire, right? It's an image of the dragon, right? I'm sorry, not the dragon. It's an image of the beast. And so it's kind of like it's trying to breathe life into the way of the empire, into the way of this eschatological idea that Rome has. Do things Rome's way. We're going to put that message out there. We're going to breathe life into that message. We're going to want you to see that message as the true way of being human. And all the world worships that, right? It's kind of the idea here. Now, I'll be honest, this is the part that's hardest for me to wrap my brain around. It's a little bit symbolic layer on layer kind of a thing.
But I see that now.
I love the idea there.
I see that now, though. This whole world we live in now is trying to say, be the best you can be now. You be satisfied. And I mean, to me, and what's that do? It just feeds into this just greedy, disgusting, sensual system, which is what the world, is promoting. So
So in the first century, right, what the image of mankind or whatever, the image that they were being presented with as the right thing to do would have been Pax Romana. Follow along and you'll be fine. And so that's the kind of this false image of humanity that is there. And again, I'm drawing the parallels of humanity because John's clearly breathing life the way God breathed life in Genesis, right? So I think that's how we get that linkage there. So and another interesting bit of this, though, the way John writes the story, is that we have another name for images that are set up to be worshipped in place of God. we call that an idol, right? Very much. So you have that kind of imagery going on here too in terms of the symbol. And the idea being that these false ideas of how mankind can flourish and what it means to be human, they're idols. We're putting them up in place of God, right? So the beast, he's basically saying, yes, there is a way, God has a way to be fulfilled, but it's not the right way. Don't you want to do my way? Okay, that's good. So I think like I said, I think that's powerful. It's a little convoluted, frankly, in my mind.
I think it's confirmed though in verse 18, because he says, here is wisdom. And that's to say, what the beast is going to try and give you is wisdom to follow this way, but here's wisdom.
I think what he's getting at there is he's actually saying, here's a puzzle for you. He's talking about 666. He gets to that thing. So should we move on to the mark of the beast since you're transitioning for me?
I don't understand it. I mean, you're not done with 13 yet, are you?
No, we're gonna talk about the 666 and stuff. Yeah, you betcha. So we talked about the land beast, and we talked about the image of the beast, and what I think that's a false image of humanity. Let's go with the mark of the beast, okay? So, mark of the beast. So we've talked here, session 1. I think we talked about it. We talked about it more in. We talked about it a lot in session 1. We've talked about it, I think, again and again here about the number play that ancient peoples love to do. It's called gematria. And it was really common in the ancient world. We talked about Pompeii, right? When Pompeii was wiped out and an ash covered everything, and then as excavators have gone in and removed the ash, they found all this graffiti on the walls, and they found that one of the pieces of graffiti was "I love her whose number is 187" or something like that, right? And so they love this. This is what ancient peoples did. You see it in ancient documents all the time. They love these kind of number codes, and this whole thing was called gematria. Was kind of the name of this stuff, right? So so when a number shows up like this in the text, an ancient person would immediately want to play around with that number. Like, okay, particularly when he says, "Hey, this calls for wisdom. You can probably figure this out." His number 666. Okay, so we're gonna get there in just a second here, but let me kind of build a couple of things. So the things to keep in mind here, the sea beast is kind of a parody or a copy of the lamb, right? We talked about how he had a head that died and came back and that kind of stuff. The land beast is the one who's giving the mark, but it is a mark of the sea beast. All right. So when they talk about most of the time in this passage, when we talk about the beast, it means the sea beast, and it usually refers to the land beast more explicitly, like the land beast or the beast that came from the land does this or that, right? So the mark is going to be a mark of the sea beast. He says it's going to take a little wisdom. I think you can figure it out. The number 666, and so we talked about how that they would convert names to numbers and stuff like that. So apparently, if you're creative enough, you can make just about anybody's name add up to 666 if you really want to. So if you do searches on the internet, you can find just about every president, going back to Reagan at least, has been turned into 666 in some way. Even if you have to translate the names into other languages to make it work, you can make it work and make it be 666. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs both, you'll find websites saying they're the Antichrist 666. All the popes you'll find have been called this. And even during the Protestant Reformation, both Martin Luther and the current pope at the time called each other the Antichrist and worked out how their names were 666. So it's easy to do, I should say, if you want to be creative enough about it. And there is a sense in which the number itself is not overly helpful, like because you can massage it into anything you want to. What's more interesting is how the mark is used in the tale and what's actually happening with the mark. But as far as 666 goes, right, most scholars kind of fall down on this one, that if you transliterate, meaning just take one-to-one the letters, Nero Caesar, which is on the coin, you take Nero Caesar and you pull it over into Hebrew, take the N for Hebrew letter for N, and the Hebrew letter for E, and so on. Translate that into Hebrew, and then apply the gematria kind of standard things to the Hebrew letters, you get 666. So it's kind of like, it's going to require a little bit of effort. You're going to have to do this little thing, but honestly, somebody in John's congregation is going to pick this up. This is not a particularly difficult gematria code.
Well, it's more popular to do that than it is now.
Yeah, like they loved to do that back then, for sure. So again, most scholars look at this and say he's probably referring to Nero by this, and that would totally make sense that this number of this awful boogeyman kind of thing is what's behind all this, right? And like I say, you'll find all kinds of people saying it's something else because you can make 666 be whatever you want. But you know, the idea that the big bad empire coming from the sea being led by the big bad boogeyman from that empire of Nero in the imagery here makes a lot of sense. It's almost the same as the value politically in rhetoric to compare your opponent to Hitler today, right? Nero was that figure for them. If I can get into an argument with you and I can say, well, you believe this, which means you must believe that, and must believe that, and that's what Hitler believes, then I've alienated you from anybody who's listening to our argument. In the same way as I'm saying it's going on here with Nero. So that's probably what's going on. Now, there's other fun things about the 666 that play into this. We know that 7 is the number of completion and or divinity and that kind of thing. And so 666 is actually one less 3 times over. Like Disney quite hit the mark, missing the mark of deity, even though maybe Nero wanted to be. And then interesting enough, the early church loved the fact that they had a way, and I don't know how this worked because I don't have the detail on it, but they loved the way that there was a way of taking Jesus Christ's name and doing gematria on that, and they would get 888. And so the idea that 8 was always seen in the early church particularly as a particularly new creation kind of number. Like Easter Sunday would be considered the 8th day of the week. It's the first day of the new week, the new thing that's coming from Jesus' resurrection. So they like the number 8 from that perspective, and that they could make Jesus' name fit 888 was kind of fun. So you had 888 for Jesus, you got 666 for this guy on the other side of the 7. So just some layers there in terms of the imagery that these people would have really resonated with because they love to do these number games. Now, how the mark is administered to people is a parody of what we saw back in chapter 7 when God seals the believers. God seals all the believers by putting a seal on their foreheads. And if you remember, we'll get to the end and the world was coming to an end and who can stand, right? And God had sealed his people with a seal. And so now the land beast is sealing everyone who's following the sea beast with a similar idea. He's given them the mark, right? So again, we're kind of seeing this counterfeit or this copying of things that God is doing in the story here. And we see that there are specific economic sanctions that are put in place if you refuse the seal. It seems very clear that whatever's going on here, if you don't have the seal, you can't participate in the economy of the empire, whatever's going on. They can't buy or sell. And we actually know this was happening to the early churches, right? We know that there were churches that were under serious financial strain, and we believe it was because they were trying to take a stand against the Roman ways and against the cult of Roma, right? And we talked before about if you were to say part of some trade, you would be part of a guild. And those guild meetings almost always had some kind of ceremony at the beginning to worship the local deity of the whatever, right? So you're a shipbuilder, and you're the shipbuilders guild.
The shipbuilder every time you face
Shipbuilder's a good and easy one. So at the beginning of the guild meetings, we're going to have our ceremony before the shipbuilding gods to make sure that our ships are built correctly. And if you're a Christian and you're saying, I don't really want to be part of that, you could see that causing a rift between you and the society you're working in, and you can even take it a step further. You could see where maybe someone, to give the example, I'm a shipbuilder, and John's a shipbuilder, and someone's coming in, and Quinn, you want to have a ship build, so you're coming to me, and you're going, John's a Christian. He doesn't participate in the shipbuilding ceremonies and stuff like that to the shipbuilding gods. And Quinn, you come to me and say, I'd love to get a ship built. John's a little cheaper. I don't know. What do you think? And I'd be like, well, if you want basically an atheist to build your ship, he doesn't pray to the shipbuilding gods. Like, if you want to call down that kind of curse on your ship, that's up to you, right? You could see how this could easily play out and be a bad thing in this society. So if you're not participating in what the empire is asking you to do, how that might cause serious economic hardship, right?
In other words, Christians were shunned.
Well, in some cities we saw that. We saw where some Christians were taking a stand and it was hurting them, right? We definitely saw that. And of course, there were others that were compromising and not doing that. So there's just, I think when we get through the end of this chapter, there's a real sense in which sides are being, choosing of sides are being applied here. Whose mark will you bear, right? Are you part of the 144,000 that were sealed by God and bearing God's mark? Or are you compromised with the culture and you have taken the mark of the beast, if you will? You're in that army. You're on that side of the conflict. Now, it's been a lot of stuff about evil, the side of evil, and we didn't want to. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, there was just in 17. There's 3 different ways. See, God seals as one seal. Mm-hmm. Verse 17, it says you got 3 options here. You can have the mark, the name of the mark, the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Mm-hmm. Is there a reason why that's giving you 3 different options? You talk about it's a parody to God giving one seal. Sure. He's saying you got 3 different.
I don't think it's mean to indicate 3 different marks. My translation says no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is the name of the beast or the number of its name. So the idea being it's a mark of some kind, and the mark is, and it's interesting because it associates with the name, right? And in the Gematria idea, the number of his name is kind of a similar idea. So I think that's what's going on. I don't think it's trying to call out there's 3 separate options there.
Right.
But yeah. So, but I do think it's very much calling us to consider that idea. Have I been sealed here, or have I been sealed here? And I think that's what's going on. Am I part of God's side, if you will, or am I part of the beast?
Are you on the east or the west? The earth or heaven? North or south?
All right. So we got one. So all 13 was a lot about the evil side and how he's setting up his strategy and his armies and whatever other, how he's doing this. When I didn't want to finish there, I wanted to do chapter 14, 1-5, just to see the other side for just a little bit. Has anybody got that one?
I do.
All right.
And I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Sion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written in their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sung as if it were a new song before the throne, and before the 4 beasts and the elders, and no man could learn that song, but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. These are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. They are they which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they were without fault before the throne of God.
All right. So this is a picture of the Lamb's army, right? It's seeing how the dragon and the beast are putting their stuff together. Here's the Lamb's army. It's the 144,000, the sealed believers that we saw before. That's not too shocking to us, I think. And it's clear that they have been faithful. It mentions that they have not been committing any kind of adultery or fornication, which, again, fornication and adultery in Scripture is almost always, particularly in symbolic books like this, a symbol of staying true to Christ. You've not been worshiping idols, that spiritual adultery kind of idea. So these saints have stayed true. They've stayed true to Christ. It says they have integrity. It mentions there's no lie in their mouths, and they have integrity, and they are not being pushed around by compromise. They are not compromising with Rome. The battle lines have been drawn. We have those that are sealed by the dragon versus those that have been sealed by God. And I think the question before us is, whose side are you on? Have you been deceived? Are you being faithful? And so we have these 2 clear sides. And then here's a picture. If you do a search for Revelation 13, this one pops up from time to time.
The dragon looks fat in that one.
You got this big dragon, and you got the beast, and you got like the land beast. The land beast is coming out, and he looks almost like a werewolf or something. I'm not sure what that is.
And the dragon. No wait, the dragon's just got a huge butt.
Okay. Very well put.
And then
those are the people I think getting worshiping the image way there in the back.
And then
they're excited to worship the image. So.
And then the sea beast has been struck by lightning or something.
He's just full of power, man. He's doing his thing. He's drinking water.
He's radiant.
Yeah.
Radiant.
So as we think about this stuff, some other things I wanted to kind of call your attention to, particularly in this chapter. There's all this parallelism and parodying going on. The sea beast that comes out of the sea is clearly a parody or a copy of the lamb. And I wanted to kind of call that out here by just showing you a few things to show you how the text kind of gives us that. The sea beast is fathered by the dragon, drawn up by the dragon, whereas the lamb is birthed by the woman, the church, that we saw before with the moon at her feet and the stars overhead and that kind of thing. The sea beast has blasphemous titles. We talk about how the Son of God would be used for Caesars and stuff like that, whereas the lamb is the Son of God. Like his titles are legitimate, actually. The sea beast was slaughtered and then resurrected again, and we know that the lamb was slaughtered and resurrected. Like that's very much a parallel. The sea beast is given authority to do what he does by the dragon, while the lamb is given early on the scroll by God the Father. And the sea beast is wearing 10 crowns, showing his authority while he's on the earth, whereas the lamb is actually ruling in heaven. And so we have these two pretty strong parallels that are going on here. These contrasts of the beast as a parody or a copy of the lamb. We see that the beast looks very powerful, but when we look behind the veil, what we see in reality here is that God has always been in charge, right? That these are, we can see the copies, if you will, when we're looking through this, and we see as he's described. 13 verse 8 actually mentions that Jesus was slaughtered, the lamb was slaughtered from the foundation of the world. And that's just an interesting thing I wanted to draw out of this text, that from the beginning, God knew what it would mean for man to have free will and for man to rebel and for man to, and that would require a sacrifice. And so from the beginning, when God created things, he was committed to the cross, right from the start. God is not a God that is content to let us destroy ourselves, but rather he rescues us, he redeems us. And God, and the other side of this is God's kingdom is not one of coercion and fear, like the dragon and the beast, but is one who has power by dying and defeating death. We saw at the beginning that Christ is celebrated and it has the honor he has because he died. Right? That was what happened in chapter 5, I think. And in the battle in chapter 12, last session, we saw that there's no real fighting that we need to do, that the battle has been won and all we do is stay faithful. It's the beast that wants us to fight, frankly. The beast wants us to fight against each other, against whatever's, strife and that kind of thing. The beast tries to convince us that if we don't participate in what the empire is doing, then our peace is going to be taken away. There's going to be trouble for us. The peaceful way is to compromise and be part of the empire that's around us. But it called us in the first chapter 13, that calls for endurance and patience on the part of the saints. Be faithful and don't give in, right? Quinn, you had something you want to add?
I forgot what I was going to say, so
all right.
All
right, we'll see if we get any further with it. And so we have this idea of whose side are you on. There's another element of parallelism here that's kind of cool. So there's some parallels between the land beast and the church. But Quinn, you remember it. What do you want to say?
Yeah, so I just had a thought here.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that we can talk about at another time, but
Okay.
I just want to say this. God knows the future and stuff like that.
Okay.
And I'm not going to disagree with that or anything, and I don't plan on. But what I'm trying to say is, do you think time flows differently for God?
There's some ideas in that way we can talk about. Sure.
Okay.
All right. So, the idea of whose side are you on? The sea beast, we said, was a clear parody of the lamb, and there are some parallels you can strike clearly between the land beast and the church. We talk about how the land beast is representative of the false teachers in the church, and so there's some linkages here. The land beast is led by the sea beast, but he sounds like the dragon, whereas the church is shepherded by the lamb. The land beast bears witness to the sea beast, while the church bears witness to the lamb, right? The land beast is pictured as doing wonders in the beast's name, Whereas in this story, the church does wonders in the Lamb's name. If you remember, the two witnesses had wonders and powers that they could do. The land beast shows the world the beast's image and actually breathes life into it, whereas the church is called to show the world the Lamb's image and to portray the message of the Lamb. And then the land beast seals with the beast mark, whereas the church believers are sealed by God. We talked about that clear parity there as well. So there's lots of the layers and interesting things here. And honestly, when you start stacking these things up, I really like this particular interpretation of what these two beasts are. It just seems to make sense given what's going on in the text here. So we got done a little bit early today. It's all right. There are some questions I thought would be fun to ask about ourselves, because I think that like I said, it's less interesting to decide whether or not you believe that 666 means Nero or not. It's more interesting to find out, what does taking the mark mean? What would that mean today? Like how am I compromising with the culture around me? I think that's places where the conversation gets interesting, and I think that's where the power of these images comes into play to challenge us. And so some questions I wanted to ask about: are we living in the Rome's way or the Lamb's way, the beast power versus lamb power, as I put it on here? Are there false images of humanity that we see celebrated in our culture? I think clearly there are some, and maybe there are some that are maybe less obvious. But in the story, the land beast sets up a false image of what to be, and people bow down and worship it, and really align themselves with it. And in today's culture, are there false ideas of what humanity ought to be that are presented to us? First of all, can we find those and identify those? And then the follow-up question would be: how is the church maybe participating in perpetuating those ideas, those false images of our ideas, I guess, of what it means to be human? So the real easy one, I think, that comes to mind for me right away is our society's obsession with beauty, and particularly for women. Like, if you have a certain body type, or they're just every glamour magazine and so on. This idea that you must look a certain way to have value, right? Particularly as a woman, like I say. That's clearly a non-biblical idea, clearly. But I think that we can unknowingly, by praising beauty too much, or whatever it might be, right? By preferring, I don't know, just how we treat people based on how they look, right? We could be part of that, part of celebrating or reinforcing that false image of what man ought to be. And that's just like the easy one I pull off the top of my head. That one's clear. But I bet you there's others. I mean, there's other places where we have that our culture presents to us. If you're this way, you'll be happy. This is what humanity should be like, and it's clearly not God's way, right?
This isn't my strong suit, since I haven't been able. Since I'm homeschooled and I'm not really part of this.
True.
I feel a rift between me and other public school kids. I'm just saying.
I thought that would be an interesting question.
I see it working for a big corporation. I mean, I'd want to throw up.
Yeah.
The people that just do anything to climb. Oh, it's so foul. Yep. I mean, up to the point, like, I'm convicted. I was told, they were going to bump me up. And I was convicted. I'm like, do I really deserve that? Okay. Do I really deserve being promoted? Mm-hmm. And I thought, and I still think about it. I don't know if I deserve it.
All right.
I don't know if I deserve it. And how do you get to your boss? No, please don't promote me. I don't know. But then I got to think, in God's sovereignty, Dustin, I want to move you.
Right. It could be a thing God's putting you.
Yeah. So I'm very. That's how I operate.
I think a question about that would be: is that influencing our view of humanity? Like, do we participate in the idea that if I just work hard enough, and if I work up this corporate ladder thingy, that's what makes me good. That's what makes me fully fulfilled as a human, right? Yeah. And I don't think God would say that that's what makes us human. That's what makes us
human. No, I agree. And there's a part, Timothy, I'd like to, we at some point go into where it talks about godliness, or gain being a measure of godliness. And that is certainly not the case. And that's another thing. Look at my house and my car. I mean, we all know what it is. And it's like, okay, that makes me want to puke. It's like, it's going to be consumed in the fire, man. It's going to melt. So what's the big deal? But yes, as a means to say, like you said, with beauty, essentially it gives you something to, all these take you back to glorifying yourself. However you want to dice it up.
I think we talked in an earlier session about materialism, and you kind of alluded to it here about if I just get enough stuff, right? Or if I have more stuff than you, then I'm better. That's a very non-Christian idea, and it's a very, I think maybe even American. It's much more a part of our culture than it is a part of what God would have us be, right?
By the way, if I could just give a brief little thing about that.
You go ahead and keep talking.
Okay. Whenever I think of the whole evolution of the Max Americana.
What's that? I don't know what that is.
Well, I came up with that. The Pax Americana being the Max Americana.
Right.
So that general idea kind of started during the 50s.
Post World War II.
Yeah.
Started seeing that more.
When America was pretty much on top of the world. That idea was pretty much celebrated during the 20s and the 50s and kind of.
Which idea was celebrated then?
More. The idea of America.
Oh yeah, okay. You think it was birthed there?
Yeah, it was kind of birthed in the 20s, I would say, and then.
Well, I think it's like human condition that goes.
Yeah, I think it was birthed in Genesis.
True.
You might see it as a.
It's
more recognizable in today's form. Probably tracing back in the 20s. Going back to the 1800s, it didn't look like it does today in terms of greed and whatever else.
Yeah, it was really flourished and became a bigger thing during the 20s. The 50s, it flourished. Because whenever I think of the 50s, I immediately think of big cars, and I think of big cars, buzz cuts, and commercials saying, "Your life looks better this way."
I think of Cuba when I think of the 50s for some reason.
Well, so Quinn, to some of the points you're making there about that picture of what it means to be a good American, right? Mm-hmm. It's have the car, have the house, have the buzz cut, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And this idea to fit in and just go easy, that kind of gets us to the question in part 3. What does it look like to take the beast's mark today? I think the idea of the mark of the beast, as it's described here, is that when you are sealed, when you're part of the culture, when you're part of the empire, if you will, things go easy for you. You can participate in the economy, you can do the things you need to do, and that when we ally ourselves intimately, let's say, with our culture around us to make things simpler for ourselves, right? To get along better, if you will, or even to prosper our own selves. Like if I do things the world's way, I'll have a better life, kind of a thing, right? I think that is the parallel to taking the mark of the beast today. We're allying ourselves with the empire around us.
You don't think it has something to do more with standing firm in the true gospel, not some perverted form of the gospel? Because it talks about, God's elect. Or I don't use the word elect here. Remember, we get back to it says, let those who have ears to hear. I mean, clearly those following the ways of the world don't have ears to hear because they're following the world. But, in reference to that, though, some people go to church, but they're very much of the world. They are very much taking the mark of the beast, saying, well, God really wants to bless me. No, he wants you to quit sinning. He wants you to repent.
He wants your sanctification. Yeah. So I think the way the text portrays the mark is if you don't take the mark, you can't buy or sell, and you can't. I think it's clear you can't participate economically in what's going on. Now, I don't think it's a stretch to say that taking the mark is buying into the eschatological things we've been talking about, what it means to be truly human and what it means to flourish. And by doing it the culture's way, it's very much against God's way and the gospel. So I don't think that's a stretch at all to say that taking the mark could be as simple as just refusing or not participating, say, in the gospel would be a piece of that whole puzzle.
Yeah.
But I do think that the way it's implied in the text is it's an allegiance kind of thing, right? The beast seals his followers with the mark, whereas God had sealed his followers with the seal.
This is drawing a distinction here. You're either got the mark of God
Yeah.
or the mark of the beast too. And,
Yeah.
and I also go to, a word that's almost forbidden in a lot of Christian circles is holiness. We're called to be a peculiar people.
Mm-hmm.
We're to be holy.
Yep.
God makes us holy, of course, but we're to be different. And in that, there's a lot of, you bring up the word holy to a lot of people. That's legalistic. No, no, it's a very hard life.
I think to that point, I think that a lot of people see that legalism, whatever another, as the easy stuff. Like, okay, just quit going to movies and quit smoking, quit doing this, and quit wearing shorts and whatever another. And you can. I mean, I find that's not hard to do, quite frankly. I mean, yeah, you make it tired of it after a while, but that's not the hard stuff. The hard stuff is aligning yourself with the gospel principles and affecting the world around you for the gospel and being peculiar in the sense of that guy has a different worldview than I do. That guy loves Christ. What's going on there?
Right.
And how that changes your values and stuff like that. But it doesn't boil down to me to whether you smoke or not, or whether or whether your hair's cut's funny, or that to me is like. That's where a lot of the legalism stuff goes, and I'm kind of like, I don't think that's the point.
Well, when people start talking about, let's face it, probably one of the biggest principles, if not the biggest principle for human application, is humility. In the gospel, and to me, that's at the root of like most of our sin. And I say that to say, yeah, it's easy for me, by the grace of God, to quit doing something I know I shouldn't. It is not easy for me to be humble.
Yes.
But I want to be. I mean, if I could say, God, make it as easy for me to be humble as it is for me to give up being doing whatever. But it's so rooted in our nature that when you start to really be whittled down, you realize this humility thing, man, is you can never have enough of it. And that's where I'm saying here now. It's just, a lot of what you talked about sounds like it has a lot to do with human pride and glorifying self and consciousness.
So I think John is putting up these two concepts of, and it really is. We've heard this all throughout this book about the Roman Empire and its view of what it is to be good and right with God, not just with God, but like fulfilled as a human being versus God's way. And I think that's just more on display here as this goes forward, and we see the two beasts kind of deceiving the world to come onto the side of the dragon. In the story as it's going, but like I said, the implications for us today are, I think these kind of questions are so much more interesting than arguing about whether 666 refers to Obama or not, or something like that. Right? That just to me isn't as interesting, or Trump or whoever you want to.
Regardless, there's going to be who it is, so you can't change. You know what I mean? So why would you sit there and?
Yeah. Now to that point, this came up a lot in the. There's another session of this that another pastor did that I'm kind of pulling all this material from, and in their discussions, they did ask that question a little more like, well, is there going to be a real market? Like, is that going to come, like a thing, like a tattoo or whatever? And I think that what's weird is like, if a seriously, obviously evil person took over the United States and required everybody to get a barcode on their hand or their forehead, I think all the Christians would go, whoa, like that's obviously the wrong thing, right? And it's where it's more subtle that it becomes a problem, right?
Sure.
How are we acclimating ourselves into the society and compromising the subtle ways? I think is really the bigger question. And will there be some awful reign of whatever another in terms of some future leader? It's possible. I don't really know that, but I do know that these kind of things keep happening in history, right? That there's a sense in which the American culture around us is anti-God, and we need to look at them with some suspicion and realize that's the beast from the sea. Like that, we need to think about that a little bit, right? Not everything that America puts forward is godly, and we should not we should at least be suspicious, right, of the culture around us and how we're being pulled away from allegiance to Christ. Yeah.
Being a bit of an amateur American historian,
Yeah.
I can tell you the general idea,
Of what?
if you want to hear it,
Of what?
Of what?
of America.
That's a big topic. Why don't you say that? Can you say that until we're done with the recording?
Sure.
Okay. And you and I can talk all you want to about that. So, yeah. So anyway, I find these questions from this passage just really a lot more compelling and convicting for me. So why don't we talk about next time? We are on a weekly schedule now from now on until the end. We're done with missing weeks. Let's look at chapters 14 to 16. The bowl judgments are going to be in here, and see what similarities you can see, because I think there's going to be some. And then ask yourself the question of where does this fit? Because we already went through these judgments before. And then here's the bonus question. What do you think the two harvests, I think it's in chapter 14, there's two harvests that come up. What do you think they might represent? Because there'll be two figures of a sickle that'll come and they'll do a harvest. What do you think that might represent? Because there's kind of some interesting symbolism there that we can talk about. So with that, why don't we pray and we'll call her done for the day. Oh, Lord God, thank you for, again, Revelation. I do thank you for this book and what insights we can gain from what you're trying to say to us and how you're revealing Christ to us. And so I just pray that you'd help us as we continue through the study, that we would see Christ more clearly in this book. I just thank you so much for the book. It's been so interesting to me, so invigorating. And we thank you mostly for, of course, for our Savior, for Jesus, what he's done for us, how he's rescued us. It's his name we pray. Amen. Okay, everybody, shut her down.